Hello and welcome to this DCD talk. My name is Kat Sullivan, Head of Channels for Compute here at DCD and SDxCentral.
And I'm Dickins, Content Director at DCD and SDxCentral also.
So if you've been following our content, you'll know that we've occasionally turned the camera onto ourselves to give you a glimpse of behind the scenes. So today we're going to be continuing that tradition and talk about one of the topics that is frankly impossible to ignore these days, which is of course AI. Over the past few years, AI has gone from being an emerging trend to one of the biggest forces shaping digital infrastructure, networking, cooling, IT, enterprise, just about everything in between. So with that in mind, it did feel like the perfect time to talk about DCD's third annual AI week, which is going to kick off next week. With that in mind, Alex, the first is the obvious question, which is why has AI become such a major focus for DCD and why is it important to dedicate an entire week of content about it?
Yeah, well, it is incredible, first and foremost, that we're already on our third iteration of AI Week. But as you say, it's gone from an emerging trend to something which is affecting every layer of physical and digital infrastructure. A few years ago, some of the conversations were a lot more theoretical. Now we're really seeing the industry move into delivery mode. And that, as you say, is affecting every layer: construction, cooling, power, networks, the list goes on and on and on. And by extension, a couple of years ago, people still weren't so familiar what data centers are. AI was starting to enter into the headlines as well. Now, every day in mainstream media, as well as our own industry-specific news, it's the sort of conversation which is dominating the headlines and has become a much bigger issue for the world at large. As I said, the conversation has moved on from what AI might mean in theory, what it could potentially impact in terms of data center builds, how we power them, to people really trying to solve these practical issues on the ground. And DCD, for those who know us, we cover all things physical infrastructure, and AI Week is dedicated to looking at every layer of that. It's a lot of content. It's a lot of different voices. I think we've got over 50 speakers, 18 sessions. So, indeed, it does need a whole week to actually tell the story. But over the last few years, the idea behind it is to give a real kind of snapshot of where the industry is when it comes to dealing with all of these issues. So we're really excited to be running it again, and looking at every stage from grid to chip.
And I mean, I think we've definitely noticed the evolution of the conversation, especially around their compute portfolio and on SDxCentral in particular. I mean, on SDx, we've even expanded one of our channels to focus on AI solely, which is just been an incredible example of how the demand for these types of conversations has grown so quickly over the last few years. But alongside AI itself, we are seeing a whole ecosystem of related challenges. Obviously, you've already touched on a few, and I think a lot is going to become evident through the conversations of AI Week, focusing on observability, security, power, infrastructure, a lot of ways at looking at how to move from AI pilots to real world deployments, which I think you touched upon earlier. So from the DCD perspective, what are some of the biggest questions that you're hearing from the industry right now that are focusing around these challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before, we've moved from the conversations of how real is this demand to the kind of practical steps different organisations, different businesses are taking to deploy all of this technology. And with that, we always knew that AI was going to be a big theme shaping the market, but it's not a theme, it's not just a trend, it's something which is really here to stay. And so organisations are looking at how they can deploy it now, but also casting an eye to the future, because as we've seen over the last couple of years, the nature of the conversation, the nature of the challenges have changed so dramatically. Organisations are really keen to make sure they've got that forward-looking stance so that they can plan accordingly as to where the industry is going. On DCD, our really popular channels, time and time again, construction, power, cooling, which comes at no surprise to the audience, I'm sure. But, as I said, we are talking practical real-world deployment questions now. But, given the speed at which the industry is growing, densifying, and the new hurdles that they're having to accommodate and overcome, we really need to look, beyond just, the how we do it and how we're doing it at speed, at scale. And so many of these conversations, and why we really enjoy AI Week so much, is because it brings all of these players together from across the ecosystem, so we can provide, this really connected end-to-end view on all of these deployment challenges as well, because ultimately your calling decisions are going to affect your power decisions and so on and so forth. And, as you say, by extension, the other part of our business, our SDx sister business, we're covering all the physical infrastructure challenges on DCD. And on the other side, we're helping answer questions about software further up the stack as well. Maybe we'll do a AI week from an SDx point of view, who knows? But certainly questions on density, questions on scale, and also the fundamental economics of it all.
And I mean, it is incredible to already see how it's grown over the last few years. As you mentioned, the conversation around AI has already shifted, and I mean, hopefully on SDx we get to explore that as well. But we're seeing parts of that conversation also being included in DCD's AI week. I think it's important to recognise we're sort of coming out of that conversation, questioning whether it's a hype, and we're really looking at, as you said, the real world deployment and how it's being put into practice. But you led the very first AI Week 3 years ago. So how have you found seeing how the conversation shifted between then and now?
So before I kind of answer that question, a little bit more information to the audience about, behind the scenes and the inception of AI Week. So probably about 2.5, pushing 3 years ago, Seb Moss, who's our group publisher at InfoX, DCD, SDx and other businesses, he came to me, and having been covering, the early stages of the AI evolution, and said, we need to cover this in video. Like, can we do an AI day? And through a bit of deliberation, a few conversations, we expanded it into what is now AI Week. But, as I said earlier, many of the conversations then were to help educate the industry and make them more AI literate and understand the nature of the problems that we were hearing a lot about, but perhaps hadn't been sort of established as fully tangible yet. We were still trying to work out which way was north a little bit when it came to what came next. Obviously, HPC, supercomputing aren't new. There's always been organisations, businesses which have been really pushing, forms of next generation compute in many, many ways. Some organisations, by the time we did AI Week 2 years ago, were already doing high density deployments and evolving technologies, to support high density infrastructure. But it was really working out how it was going to affect the industry en masse. As I said earlier, it's not a theme, it's not a trend, it's a fundamental change which is shaping the industry and beyond. To my earlier point, we can't get away from it in mainstream media and social media as well. So it was this conversation really about kind of sizing it and working out how it might affect things. The conversations were fundamentally a bit more theoretical. We were talking about to GPU or not to GPU. That was a session title of one of the discussions. But as I said, now it's all about deployment, how we're doing it quickly, how we're working with people, and how we're building, relationships with other players beyond just the traditional digital infrastructure market, grids, etc., so that we can actually continue this trend, or more than trend, into the future, because it's here to stay. I think the language has changed a fair bit as well. These challenges of site selection, powering a data centre, your calling infrastructure challenges, they've always been there. But, when we're seeing things like, electrical design having to be totally overhauled to 800 VDC. We're also talking about other things like AI factories, neoclouds, terms which we weren't even banding around really in AI Week, the first. But now, a commonplace, and other things as well which are having to be brought into consideration, like sovereignty and things like that. There's just so much more to consider, and real hurdles which are being put into place, which perhaps we hadn't thought about quite so much before. But yeah, it's a fascinating place to be in. To shameless plug, if I may. I'm going to be moderating a session with Schneider, Motivair and TeraWolf during AI Week. And they are talking about not how they're planning to, but how they have deployed 500 megawatts of AI capacity with a plan to scale that to 750. I mean, if we were having that conversation 2 years ago, that would have seemed like extreme, but now actually it's one of many, but a fascinating example of the real deployments that are being undertaken and how quickly they've been brought off the ground as well. So, as I said, it's moved from being maybe a forward-looking trend, a future theme, to something which is really happening now and is affecting absolutely everyone in every layer. And organisations are really trying to work out how they can deploy and advance.
I think it's really impossible not to notice how AI is just shifted from talking about, say, from the compute standpoint, which obviously I'm closer to on the video side, but it's becoming harder not to talk about power, not to talk about cooling. I mean, I had a completely networking focused conversation the other day where we ended up talking about plumbing because of the progress, the knock-on effect of going from just one little change, how that's actually going to affect construction, going to affect site selection at the end of the day. So it's a really interesting time to be having these conversations. Obviously, you mentioned Seb Moss earlier, so the editorial team is very much also involved. It's sort of important to talk about AI Week is a video, a week of video content, but there's so many other ways that obviously our audience may or may not know they can experience content on our website through written and video. But just staying on video for a second, one of the things that does always stand out with AI Week is the caliber of speakers that we have on the website. So this year's program features quite a few different leaders from a variety of parts of the industry. Why is it important to bring them all together to talk about these types of topics, have those different perspectives? And also, are there any sessions or speakers that you're particularly looking forward to hearing from?
Yeah, great question. I mean, as we spoke about a little bit earlier, there are so many different facets to the AI story. Every layer of physical software infrastructure is being affected by high density, by these new workloads. So it's really important to make sure we have cohesive, connected conversations to bring all of these discussions across, the various different verticals that we've mentioned during this conversation: power, cooling, construction, networking, workload placement strategies in one place, so that we, like the industry, avoid talking about this important stuff in silos, and we actually think of data centers, digital infrastructure, the move to higher and higher densities as a full ecosystem approach. In terms of kind of key speakers, you've really put me on the spot. There are so many to choose from. One which comes to mind first and foremost would be Gio, CEO of Vertiv, who's joined us for the last 3 years, with the whole Vertiv team, actually, who have been our headline sponsor since the beginning. And he's his third appearance in the series, where he'll be speaking with Dan Loosemore once again, our CEO. And I'm really excited to see that one, because as we've spoken about over the last 15-20 minutes, so much has changed over the last few years, and Geo and Vertiv bringing that global infrastructure, power, cooling perspective, I think will offer some really interesting insights. And certainly before the series, I'll be catching up on the last two, so I can really see how the conversation has changed over time. We also have Doug Adams of NTT, who'll be joining us again, who's going to bring that operator colo perspective and really speak to customer demand and that kind of forward-looking angle as to where appetite is coming from. And I mean, everyone loves the power conversations at the moment, myself included. We've got Eaton speaking, who'll be really sort of demonstrating the power architecture angle and how we can upgrade our electrical design. So for those 800 VDC conversations, I think that'll be really, really helpful. But also in the power or in the ecosystem at the moment, obviously power time and time again is a really pressing issue. It colossally impacts resilience. We've got a whole host of different battery companies who are going to come and join us to talk about the innovations in battery tech, which are allowing us to integrate more resilience into our businesses, despite the scale and the demand and the extremity and the volatility of some of the workloads as well. So I think that's going to be really exciting. And of course, whilst not video, Seb and his team, they'll be producing some really interesting editorial content that you mentioned. The AI Week supplement is well worth tuning into, and worth a read, I should say. We're not just talking video, but I think, you know, that's always a fantastic piece for kind of editorial to really bring all of those themes together in a really nice, concise piece, which will follow the event, which I'm very much looking forward to reading as well.
I think we've basically covered this to some degree, but just for those in our audience who might not actually know what to expect from AI, because we've been talking editorial, video, all types of different conversations to be had, what are some of the key things that you would highlight to explain to somebody who does not know what AI Week is? Why should they tune in?
Well, it's starting next week, so you can still register. The way we've structured AI Week is, as I said, so that we can really provide that full ecosystem of what's happening in the market, in the digital infrastructure industry, as we see workloads evolve, densities increase. Day one is our big picture, looking at the state of the market, and that's where we'll bring in CEOs, C-suite speakers to really talk about what they've seen and share their insights over time. We then kind of take a view of kind of day by day, going through the different layers of digital infrastructure. The first sort of core day on the Tuesday, we'll look at grid level challenges, and that's everything from power access to site selection to potential retrofits of different facilities. And then the next one will look inside the facility as to changes in cooling infrastructure, power architecture, connectivity, and things like that. And then day four, we look inside the rack to really see where the magic happens and what's happening when it comes to the fundamental hardware that is shaping all the other infrastructure above it. And then the final day, we do a nice wrap-up day and really kind of put that eye to the horizon and explore what we anticipate to be talking about at AI Week Part 4.
Amazing. Well, that's really exciting. I'm personally very excited for AI Week. Thank you, Alex, so much for taking the time to speak with me today. That does seem like it's all we have time for, but AI Week returns again next week, so do make sure to tune in for lots of interviews, panel discussions, all types of topics across digital infrastructure today, so make sure to tune in next week. But for now, that is all we have time for, so thank you so much and goodbye.